Hello.
Hello.
Okay, we are broadcasting now, and we'll wait a few minutes as folks gather into the virtual space. I see the numbers increasing and increasing, so it's so wonderful that people are joining us today. Thank you, Daze, for being with us today. We're so excited to speak.
Thank you for having me today.
And it's so exciting to watch these numbers go up and up and up, and to see the many people who are going to be part of the family program City as Campus. Okay. Okay, so welcome everyone to the family program City as Canvas, a live session with Daze, offered by the Museum of the City of New York. My name is Joanna Steinberg. I'm the Curator of Education Programs here at the museum, and this is part of the MCNY Kids Create series that offers art making and discussion with New York City artists. This broadcast will be recorded and we are live streaming to YouTube and Facebook as well. There is closed captioning available for the program, and if you're joining through Zoom today, you can just click on the closed captioning icon to enable it. So in this session, you will meet Daze, a prolific artist and acclaimed graffiti writer. You'll see highlights in the museum's Martin Wong graffiti art collection, hear behind the scenes stories from Daze about his work, learn how to draw your own pieces, and ask questions. And so we encourage you throughout the session. We'd love to hear your questions and what you're taking away from the session. You can click on the Q&A box. By clicking on this icon at the bottom of your screen, you can type in your question to the box that appears that's called Q&A, and we'll be holding up some of those questions at the end of the session after the art making. And so it's my pleasure now to introduce Daze, and just to give a few notes from his bio. As a teenager in New York in the 1970s, while attending the High School of Art and Design, he painted on nearly every subway line before transitioning to painting on canvas in 1980. Ever since, Daze has been interpreting the city through art and has a successful studio practice. He's exhibited worldwide and worked with communities on murals locally and internationally. His work is in the collections of many museums, including our own Museum of the City of New York. We first exhibited Daze's work in the City as Canvas exhibit in 2014 that featured art from the Martin Wong graffiti art collection. Here you can see the large-scale painting that Daze created at the museum. And 2 years later, the museum had a solo exhibit of Daze's work entitled Chris Daze Ellis, City is My Muse. And here you can see the beautiful paintings inspired by Daze's experiences and memories of the city. And so today we'll be showing you just a few highlights in the Martin Wong collection that also incorporate some of the early works that Daze created as part of this amazing artistic movement from the 1970s, where artists used public space as a canvas for their work. And so the collection has many black books and the original sketchbooks that artists used to draft pieces, often that were put up in public spaces. Here we see a page from Daze's black book, and it gives us a real sense of the creative process that Daze will be speaking with us about today. And so as the city cracked down on graffiti and spent millions of dollars erasing it from public space, East Village artist Martin Wong began quickly collecting the work and becoming a champion of the movement. He opened a Museum of American Graffiti and eventually gifted his extensive collection to the Museum of the City of New York in 1994. And so these records, these beautiful pages of the Black Books are an incredible record of what the art looked like at this period of time. And again, gives us a sense of the process. He also collected many paintings as some of the writers began transitioning to doing works on canvas. And so here we have a painting by Daze called Transition in 1982 that captures this critical moment as he transitions from painting on trains to painting on canvas. And so it is my absolute pleasure now to introduce Daze, who will talk about his experiences as a young artist and how it's impacted his practice to this day. And so again, please send in your questions, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your bar, type it into the chat box, and we will be holding up those questions throughout the session. I will now pass the mic to Daze. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me here for this great session and giving me the opportunity to share um, a bit about my personal history, how I started painting trains in the mid 1970s, and how I went from doing that to making paintings on canvas and working with students on mural projects all over the world. So I guess we can get right into it. This photo here, which is by the esteemed photographer Martha Cooper, illustrates kind of what my childhood was like as a kid growing up in New York City in the late 60s and early 1970s. A lot of what we had to do was based on our own kind of daily adventures and the process of finding fun wherever we could find it. So these two kids are hitching a ride on the back of a city bus, which is something that you wouldn't even think about doing today, or or even, it would just be so dangerous. But back then, it was pretty easy to do that, and a lot of kids did this. Next, next. So this is one of a typical subway piece that I did. I believe this was done in about 1980. And just a kind of quick, brief history of myself. As a kid, I was always into drawing, and I made my own comics and my own comic book characters, and I was always into drawing in my sketchbooks. In the early 1970s, I started noticing that trains were being painted, and I didn't know what it was about or who did it or anything behind it. It seemed to me to be a complete mystery. However, it was the colors and what was being done was real fascinating to me. And when I entered high school, I started meeting kids that were actually going out and painting their names on the sides of subway cars. So it was a whole underground culture that I was discovering and being kind of drawn into. And the more questions that I had about it, the more answers that I found, the more questions that I had. But it's not an exaggeration that soon it became my whole life. And I started painting trains with my friends from 1976 to about 1983 or 84. And a lot of the trains that I did were collaborations with other artists. So to explain that further, the typical car that I would do, it would be a single subway car, and I would paint it with either one other person or two other people. And occasionally I would paint the entire car myself, but a lot of it had to do with collaborating with other people. Next, next. So this is another example of the, no, back, too fast. This is another example of a subway car that I did. This was the Broadway local line. And this is the left half of a car that I painted in its entirety. The other part was a name of a very famous and legendary writer named Kane One. So what you're seeing now is a part of a memorial car that I did. And interesting story about this car is that I painted it for Kane One when he died in the 80s, memorial to him. And oftentimes when you paint something, you finish it and you leave, wherever you're painting, whether it's a train yard or a layup or a tunnel, and that's it. The piece takes on a life of its own. So I didn't really see this piece until I was on my way to my friend's Kane One's funeral, and there it kind of rolled up right in front of me. So a lot of the subway cars that we did after they were completed, they took on a life of their own and they traveled all across the boroughs. Next. This is a picture of me in, I want to say maybe, it's 1982. And I'm standing in front of an unfinished handball court mural that I did with Crash, who was my partner at the time. Um, During this period, not many people from the subway graffiti scene were painting walls. They're more interested in painting trains. So we did this wall. It was in behind the handball court is a school that was completely abandoned. This was in the South Bronx. And a lot of the buildings and a lot of the area was burnt out and abandoned, but people lived there. It was still very much a community of families and, you know, people that had businesses there. So we took it upon ourselves to, without commission, to go out and paint this handball court, just for ourselves and for whoever else could appreciate it. It's unfinished because we didn't have a ladder and to complete the top part of it. But you'll see my name is on the left-hand side and Crashes is on the right-hand side. And behind me is a planet that's kind of exploding. Next. Next. This is a piece that I did in the same neighborhood in the South Bronx, which was about Brook Avenue. And it was also done about 1982. And this was a part of an early exhibition that Crash and I did, and other artists did at a place called Fashion Moda in the South Bronx, which was an alternative art gallery that was run by the artists Joe Lewis and Stephen Ince and William Scott. We went down the Brook Avenue street, and there are many abandoned storefronts. So with our own paint, completely uncommissioned, we started painting these storefronts. And they were kind of our first attempts at painting murals. They were just gates. But really loved it. And we didn't get paid for it, but people came by and they complimented us profusely about what we were doing, and they were just really happy that someone was taking the time out to kind of make their world a little brighter. What we did for the opening was we handed out maps that designated where all the mural locations were so people could go on their own self-guided tour and look at the murals. So for this project, it was myself, Crash, and Freedom, and we did maybe 5 or 6 murals along Brook Avenue. Next. Next. This is an invitation for my, sorry, a little fast. Back.
Oh, sorry, there's a bit of a delay. I hear you now.
Okay. This is an invitation for my first solo exhibition that was held at Fashion Moda, the alternative art gallery that I had mentioned earlier. It was a real big honor for me to have a solo exhibition. This was maybe about, I think about 1981, maybe it was 1982. And I was very much a part of Fashion Moda and the exhibitions that took place there. And so they gave me my own show. And up until this time, I had participated in group shows that were in nightclubs or, in galleries. There was no museum attention yet for this type of work. And there was really not that much gallery attention for it either. So we were left up to doing exhibitions wherever we could, abandoned spaces, nightclubs, as I mentioned, alternative art spaces. So they gave me this solo show, and I didn't really know how to put together a show. I just sort of worked on my painting 6 months before the opening, and whatever I had is whatever I put up. And one of those paintings that was in that exhibition is now in the permanent collection of the Museum of the City of New York. So it's great. Next. This is a photo of myself and the artist Keith Haring. That was probably about 1984. And Keith was this photo was taken at the Roxy, which was a really important, not just nightclub, but a hip hop venue that was happening downtown on 18th Street and 11th Avenue. It was a roller skating rink, And every Friday night, they would have some of the, you know, early downtown kind of hip hop parties that were a big success with people like Africa Bambaataa and Africa Islam DJing, and you'd have Jazzy J DJing, and people like the Cold Crush Brothers and Fantastic Five kind of on the mics, and Rocksteady crew, of course, dancing, and you have like Futura and Dondi painting backdrops. So it's kind of an encapsulated view of the hip hop culture that had been going on for a while in neighborhoods like the South Bronx, Queens, and in Brooklyn. Um, so Keith was a great artist and a good friend. He was someone that was inspired by the work that he saw in subway cars and that was being done in New York City, and kind of went on to create his own very interesting and complex language with the character, with the and the things that he did. I looked up. He became successful very early and very quickly, and I looked at his example as a way to kind of handle success, because Keith kind of could have easily had a gallery career and that would have been it. But he was always very socially conscious and always conscious of inviting the public into his world, and working with kids and schools and all that. Next. This is a mural that I did with Keith Haring, Kenny Scharf, Knock 167, LA2, On 2, and Crane, amongst others. This wall was on Houston Street in the Bowery, and was done right after Keith Haring had done the same wall. So this wall was kind of gaining notoriety because it was a very visible spot. And the wall the story behind the wall is that I think that Kenny and I approached Kenny Scharf about doing some collaborative work on canvas. And he suggested, instead of doing that, perhaps we should do a mural. So this wall quickly became kind of a fun, what I would think of as a fun gallery wall, because many of the artists that painted it were affiliated with the Fun Gallery, which was also another legendary East Village gallery that was showing some of the best artists of that generation. So we did this completely, again, uncommissioned. We came out, we had ladders, people were filming it and photographing it. So it looked like it was a legitimate commission, but it really wasn't. We completed this whole day, and it was a lot of fun to collaborate with everyone. It was not there was no plan for it. People just sort of kind of showed up, picked spots where they were going to begin painting, and LA2 and Keith started kind of filling in the in-between areas, and we finished it in a single day. This is a cover for a catalog for one of the very first exhibitions that I participated in Europe. It's an exhibition called Arte di Frontiera, and it took place in Bologna, Italy. And you'll see on the lower right-hand corner is a subway car that I did with Daze. The whole car said Trap, Daze. And the top part of that is a Style Wars. The middle part is a Style Wars car that was done by Knock 167. And the top part of it is a car that was done by Dust and Sin. So these photographs were taken by Henry Chalfant, who I believe is also in the museum's collection. And this was a very important part of my evolution as a writer, as an artist, because it was the first time that I had gone to Europe for an art event. So here I am, about 1984. I'm already, transitioning from, painting subway cars to, refining my studio practice and exhibiting in galleries all over the world. But this this was kind of really the beginning part of it. Next. This is a photo taken of myself in Italy doing a painting for that exhibition. When we arrived in Italy, I found that I didn't have enough paintings, so the museum proposed that I would do, some paintings to kind of round out the exhibition. And I painted this on the museum's terrace. And it was kind of an awkward moment for me because the European paint at that time wasn't really that great. The paint in America was still much better at that point, but I was just kind of trying to do something, spontaneous that I could leave with the museum. Next. This is another early painting from 1984, and this painting is not in spray paint as were the majority of my paintings at that time. This painting was done in, sorry, this painting was done in acrylic, and it is a depiction of um, kind of the negative aspects of what was going on in New York City at that time. So you see like drugs, there's depictions of drugs and depictions of people using drugs, and there seems to be like this shady kind of um, thing going on between maybe a tenant and the landlord. And I'm using words in the painting, and I was looking at work that Jean-Michel Basquiat was doing, and how he was using words in his paintings, almost like brushstrokes. So I wanted to kind of use these words as like a referral point for what I was doing. See an image right now for some reason. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can't really see any image right now.
Oh, I will re-screen share.
Okay, great. Okay, go ahead. I can see you.
Okay. Can you see now?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
I love this piece.
Okay, so this is another painting that I did about Coney Island, which is a place that I visited in many times as a kid growing up in Brooklyn. And it shows a guy leaping out, off the pier and into the water. And the painting is about a kind of a leap of faith because I would see kids do this a lot. And if you had to time it correctly so that when the tide came in, that's when you would dive in. If you did tide out, you could get hurt because it was kind of shallow. So it's like these people kind of watching this guy and kind of cheering him on, and he's just taking this leap of faith. And the whole topic about Coney Island was something that really interested me a lot as a series. So this is maybe the most definitive painting that I did from that series about Coney Island. Next. And here's a photo of myself and Martin Wong, maybe in the mid to late 1980s. And we're standing in front of, we're in his apartment studio, and we're standing in front of many of his paintings. He made a lot of his paintings. He converted his living room into his painting studio. So he could just sort of like get up at any time of the day or night and just begin painting. He and I shared a really great friendship. We were also kind of like-minded in that we're both artists, and we were both trying to make these paintings that had to deal with New York City. He was also an inspiration, and I kind of learned a lot from watching him paint, and just his approach to art was really fascinating. And he was very fascinated in turn in graffiti and in the artists themselves, and started collecting it. And that collection is now in the hands of the Museum of the City of New York. This is another painting from another series I did about elevated subway stations, which also was something that fascinated me because, part of my career as a writer, I did paint on elevated stations in the city, but I also liked the way that, you were outside. So if you were traveling on a subway car and all of a sudden it became elevated and you were outside, you could really see how the cityscape would change during your journey, whether it was from Manhattan to Brooklyn or Brooklyn to Queens. It was really interesting to see, as a passenger, how those neighborhoods would change slowly and kind of take on personalities of their own. So I painted this guy. The station is Whitlock Avenue in the Bronx, and there's a guy there, and he's kind of disappearing, or he's almost ghost-like, and that's to show, how neighborhoods change, but people change too. There's generations that come and go, and new generations replace them. So him kind of like disappearing or dissolving into the scene is just showing this transition. Next. This is a painting I did called Golden Years. It's a more recent work, and it's an old subway car. And if you look on the right-hand side of the car, the dates 1976 to 1983, and those are the years that I was active, as a subway rider, as a guy, a young kid going out and painting subway cars in New York City. So it's a little bit nostalgic because, as I said, it's more recent, and I'm thinking about my past and how it was really important for my evolution as an artist to be a subway rider. This is a mural that I did in Rochester, New York, as a part of an amazing mural initiative called Wall Therapy, which is still going on to this day. And the name of the painting is called Rochester Dream. And you see a girl here with her eyes closed, and she's, dreaming of a real positive future, not just for some people, but for everyone. So this was done in a community in Rochester that kind of there's crime in the area. It's a little bit run down, but I wanted to paint something positive, something uplifting, and something that people could be transported, to another time and feel good about. So I also have a small video that will show, I think later on, that shows the process of this mural and how it came about. Thanks. This is a wall that I did in the South Bronx, and a lot of the pieces that I did write my name, I've always incorporated figurative or elements or characters or something like that. So not really sure what year I did this in, but you'll see, like, there's the kid holding up, his sword, and he's almost like he's like in a costume, and he's chasing this imaginary monster that's at the bottom of my piece. I remember that this was done with the Tats crew and with many artists that day, and it was a Halloween wall that we all collectively worked on in the Bronx. This is the wall that I did in 2006 in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And I did a lot of, my first trip to Brazil, I think, was in 2001 to participate in about the hip hop scene there. And when I got there, I realized there were a lot of writers, guys like the Fleshbeck crew in Rio de Janeiro, Os Gemios and Binho from Sao Paulo, Nina, Speto, Chino. There were many writers there, and I was really inspired by what they were doing. They had a terrific energy, so I began to be a part of what they were doing, both in Sao Paulo and in Rio. So here I've painted. It's a piece with the Flashback crew in Rio, and I painted kind of like a character like a street musician that's sitting on a soapbox and playing music, which is something that you would see quite often there. Next. This is a part of a youth project that I did in the favelas in Rio. And, I want to begin to say that aside at this point, it's probably about 2000 and I'm not sure what the date was on this, 2006 or whatever it was, but I started to become involved with art workshops for students all over the world. So a lot of times I'd go into areas where there's a lot of crime and a lot of negative elements, and I would do these collaborative mural projects with kids that were based on workshops. So here I am. Whenever I work with kids, they're always really curious about how to use spray paint, and they're super excited and super amped up. And I want to use it. I want to use it. And they're really not at the point where they could use, use it effectively, but yet they want to try it out. So at some point in the project, I give a few of them the chance to use spray paint to get a feel for it, because using spray paint is almost like picking up a musical instrument. You pick it up and you try to use it, but it takes a long time to be able to get to the point where you've perfected it and you just feel comfortable with it. So the little girl here, she's kind of spray painting a plant or a flower or something on the wall, and she's excited, and the other kids are super excited as well. Next. This is another collaborative project that I did with Thrive Arts here in New York, which is a mural initiative that works with schools throughout the 5 boroughs. And they do some terrific projects with students. So it's in Coney Island, and I'm working with some of their best students that come from citywide. And I painted this kind of cycloptic merman that's the central part of the mural, and each student kind of has their own section. So you see coming from the center, you see these lines, they're ribbons, and each student will have their own section within there. And I really didn't tell them what to paint. I encouraged them to come up with their own ideas. And I always kind of encourage students to come up with their own ideas. So the only kind of parameters that they had was that I wanted them to make something that either had to do with Coney Island or had to do with, say, like a carnival, so that it all tied together. So the Cyclops character from the Spook House, and he's another thing that's very iconic for Coney Island as an amusement park. And I've kind of turned the bottom part of him into kind of a fish. So this is the first part where I'm making a sketch for the mural. Next. So this is after my first sketch is done. Everyone starts painting in the background color. So you see it's gonna, the center part of my character is going to be in grays and lavenders and greens, very cool colors. And the rest of it is going to be in real hot colors, real warm. So whatever they do inside that is going to be, very, very hot, very warm, and it'll make an interesting contrast. So this is the second part to it. Next. And this is the mural completed. So you'll see I've completed my character, and he's wearing a ribbon that says Spookorama. The cycloptic merman is in there. And if you look at all the detail around him, you'll see there's King Neptune, there's seahorses, there's Nathan's hot dogs having a battle with Nathan's French fries. There's kind of a mermaid fashion show and people riding roller coasters. So really, this is definitely one of my favorite collaborative projects that I've done with with students. I was really proud of it, and it's still there. So if you're out in Coney Island, you go visit it. Next. This is a project, another project I did in Ecuador with students there, which was part of a project that was sponsored by the State Department in Washington, D.C., and the Bronx Museum here in New York. So I went to Ecuador, to Quito, and I collaborated with maybe around 80 students altogether. We did 3 gigantic murals, and I did maybe 6 murals on my own within a month's time. And each mural that we did had to do with climate and the environment. And Ecuador is one of the few countries that has this sort of extreme climate, all within the same country. So in the northern part, in Quito, is very cool, higher altitude, volcanic, and the southern part is more tropical and jungle-like. So a lot of the students are very concerned with the environment and how, you know, the environment is being damaged by outside country who are kind of mining it for its own resources. So they've depicted a lot of that in their own way in this mural. Next. This is another mural in Coney Island, and this is a mural that I did, which depicts new and old Coney Island. So you'll see the old part of Coney Island is this elephant, which was the old, it was a hotel actually in the shape of an elephant. And the 5 cents part was what rides cost to go on in that day. You get on, you know, the Cyclone or something like that for a nickel, and ride it. And the rest of the mural, which is in full color, depicts it now. So I have the bumper cars, and I have flashing lights and the word thrills. And then you have like $10, which is what some rides cost to go on now. So yeah, big difference now. Now, this is a painting I did of Staten Island Ferry, which is also another, like Coney Island, was a part of my childhood as a kid. And it depicts, you know, as a kid, going on the Staten Island Ferry was a big adventure for me because, you know, the ferry would pull out and you're just going to Staten Island. But for me, it felt like we were going to a different country. You know, like as a kid, you're watching the city, you know, as the ferry pulls out, you're watching the whole downtown part of New York City and the skyscrapers and the buildings. And I just felt like that anything was possible here in New York. Next. This is a painting from my Times Square collection series that depicts the center part of the painting is my friend Wendell Headley, and it depicts the urban cowboy and people in Batman costumes, and it's called Masquerade because it's about kind of people dressing up and adopting other personalities or personas, and you know, kind of making a living doing that. Next. I also sometimes work in sculpture. So this is a sculpture in resin that I did of a character called the Big Boss, who, you know, was just like a character that was popping up every now and then in murals or things that I would do. And, you know, he's kind of a businessman, but, you know, it's not really clear whether or not he's a good guy or perhaps even a bad guy. He's got his briefcase, as they often have that. And this is like just sort of one of my early forays into sculpture, which, you know, now do more often and I'm much more interested in. Okay, next. This is a mural in Baton Rouge, Louisiana that I did with students there. And this mural is about learning and about reading in particular. I went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I did several murals with with students there that all were kind of centered around learning. And I also did several of my own murals there as well.
Okay, so this is the video you mentioned of wall therapy. And
Yes.
folks have also been asking if they should have their pencils and paper ready. So the answer is yes after
Yes.
this video.
After this. Yes. Okay, that's great. All right, so that little video showed a little bit of my process of painting, and you'll see that there were two kids that were painting the mural with me in the early part of the video, and those are guys that were just showed up to watch me paint, and they were standing there, and at some point I kind of got down off the lift and just asked them if they wanted to paint too, and they were just really psyched to kind of be a part of it. So I'm gonna like the project now, the interactive project, and I'm gonna start out by saying that a lot of people wonder how letters are created. So now I'm gonna teach you how you can create your own letters. The first thing that you have to do before you start drawing is you have to think of a name to draw. And it's that way for every writer. You start to think about, okay, I want to write, but what do I write? So for you guys out there, you could choose your name, your own given name, or you can invent the name that you feel comfortable with. So when I started thinking about some of the letters that I could draw best, and I just I put them together, and I formed the name Daze, Daze, and it just kind of sounded right, and it felt kind of a nice flow, and no one else was writing that, because I think what's really important when you're choosing a name is you don't want to choose a name that other people have, because a certain part of writing is about individuality. So you begin by doing the first outline, or just drawing the outline of your letters. And you could see, like, the letters are not separate. They kind of come together and they fit together almost like a jigsaw puzzle. So you just start like drawing it, and my D is real curvy, but you can still kind of read it as a D. And the A, you can still read that as an A, but the top part of the A and the top part of the Z kind of connect together. And then the E, finally, I didn't finish the E because I'm kind of showing you the process, but the E, and it's kind of behind the Z just a little bit. Like each letter that you do is not one on top of the other, but there's the first letter, and then the second letter is a little bit behind the first one. So it kind of goes like that in that sequence. Okay, number two. So now you'll see the first outline, and I've indicated where the outline is, and you'll see how I've created my name in its entirety. So people want to, you just, a lot of times you just don't want to have an outline, even though you can do that. So you want to do certain tricks or some certain things that will make your name kind of stand out or make it even appear to be three-dimensional. So what I've done here, and this was learned from other writers when I started writing. I learned a lot just from observation. I didn't really have someone that was sitting down and showing me step by step how to do anything. But you'll see that I've added a shadow to the letters. So the shadow kind of makes your name stand out more, and it appears to kind of jump off the page a little bit. So this particular shadow is on the right-hand side. You could also do it on the left-hand side, but I'm right-handed, so very often I did it on the right-hand side, and it's a shadow. And you'll see this technique used sometimes in commercial lettering and signs and advertising, and so really, I'm using an element that's used quite often, where I'm using this shadow. There's other things that you can do where you can make it even more three-dimensional. I think a lot of people now work in various programs on the computer, and they have all sorts of things that they can do that can enhance their lettering and everything, but we're just working by hand now. We're just drawing everything out. So this is my name, the outline. It's in a very readable style that I think everyone can read, and it has a certain flow to it, and it's kind of coming off the page just a little bit. This is all very, very basic. So now I've started to add things, that little elements that can make it a little more complicated. So I've added arrows. And arrows are a device that just about every writer uses when they're doing a piece. It's something that has been handed down over the generations. And to quote Knock 167 in Star Wars, everyone has their own arrow. So you'll see in the part of my D, I've kind of made an arrow that goes through the bottom part of the D and comes out the other side. And behind the E and the top part behind my D, I've added other arrows too. Just as there's all sorts of ways that you can add devices like arrows to make your pieces and to make your name to appear very, very complex. And like I said, the arrow is just one device that you can use. It's not the only one, but it's a real basic one that just about every writer uses at some point, you know. And I think when you see it, writers doing super complex work, you'll that if you're really to kind of break it down, it would be very, very simple. They've added a lot to it to make it appear to be complex, but it's actually kind of simple.
And for those who are drafting as you're watching in the process, we will be reposting the video. So if you want to spend more time looking at these pieces that Daze laid out, you'll be able to access it again.
I think also, when we're doing the Q&A in the end, we can leave the last outline up. for
Sure.
people to look at as a reference.
Perfect.
Great. So I think this is the last part, and after I've kind of made my piece more complex by adding arrows and a shadow, I've added a cloud, and a cloud is providing the background for my name. It could be a color that enhances my name. You could do different things to it. It doesn't always have to be a cloud. It could be a splash shape, or you can really use your imagination in creating letters and creating your own name. But I'm just showing you some of the real basic things. So a cloud is something that people use quite often to kind of enhance the appearance of your name. And as I was saying earlier in the discussion, I added clouds, but I also added characters and figurative elements that brought attention to my name. And I think that's something that I was kind of known for as a writer, is that I wouldn't use pre-existing characters from Walt Disney or from wherever. I would invent my own characters and I would use them in my piece. And sometimes I use those things in replace of letters. So after you've done all that, you the next step, whether you're using markers or paint or crayons or whatever it is to color the interior of your piece. So I don't have anything that depicts that. I've shown a lot of examples throughout the discussion of what it looks like in color, but you can use whatever colors you want. I would try not to use colors that are too dark and to stick with light colors, because the darkest part of your name should be the outline, because that's what you want to really stand out. And you're going to use light colors to fill it in. Okay, so there you have it. I'm going to leave you now with the finished outline that you can use as a reference and refer to. And I'm going to answer some questions for you.
Thank you so much, Daze. This is so helpful to hear you kind of narrate the different parts of the process so that people can get started designing their own. We've had brilliant questions coming through in the session, and we'll respond to as many of the questions as we can, though we probably can't cover all of them, but we'll group them by interest to really address what this group wants to know. Some folks had questions about if you had a favorite piece that you ever did.
I've had many pieces that I look back on and I think, wow, that came out really good. I don't have one single favorite piece. I'm always looking to do the next piece, and maybe that's going to be my favorite. It kind of keeps me going as an artist. So I'm sorry, but I don't have a favorite. There's many favorites.
Got it. Well, some folks want to know if you always knew that you loved art, and when did you find this this interest in yourself?
Yes, I found it early on through comic books. So I would look at the Sunday funnies, or the comic books that would appear in the Daily News or the Sunday edition of the Daily News, that had comics like Beetle Bailey and Dick Tracy and Hagar the Horrible, and I was really fascinated in the stories and the people that drew it. I spent a lot of time inside as a kid, so I started drawing these comics, and then I started collecting Marvel comics and DC comics and Mad Magazine, and those things kind of taught me how to draw, because my first attempts, I would look at what was going on in Mad Magazine and Marvel Comics, and I would try to copy it. And in copying those comic books, like, the X-Men, Spider-Man, Batman, I would learn about anatomy and shading and things like that. So I was a real big comic fan before I got into any of this.
Yeah, I actually had questions about how you really imagine the characters that you came up with yourself. What sparks that process?
You're just using your imagination. And I think that, of course you have reference points, but you're really just kind of coming up with things that, interest you as a kid at that time. Like I think in the 1970s, there were like, in the early 1970s, there were like tons of cop shows on TV, tons, and movies too. So I think some of my first characters had to do with like cops and, special forces and stuff like that, you know. Um, and then it went on to more fantasy oriented things that were like, giants and creatures and outer space, you know. And then things kind of got more satirical because Mad Magazine was a big influence on me as well.
Mhm. Many folks are in awe of what you showed today and have questions about how to refine their own techniques in practice in terms of really enabling themselves to create their own pieces. They're noticing that it's hard at first. And how do you practice?
It's real difficult, but for every failure, it's all part of the journey. And I think that one thing that helped me out was really having a good work ethic and doing it all the time. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that, writing became kind of my whole life. And I say that because, I wasn't just painting trains all the time. No, I was at home drawing all the time and trying to perfect what I did, just like a musician would try to perfect playing an instrument. So, you just have to have a good work ethic. And even though I went to the High School of Art and Design, I still consider myself largely self-taught because all of this that you're seeing wasn't taught in classrooms. It was kind of handed down from one generation to the next, either by word of mouth or uh, by observation.
Folks seem to have questions about the many different phases and parts of your practice. So I'll go in chronological order here. But some people want to know what it actually felt like to paint a train and how long that kind of process would take.
The process would vary. It could either be a couple of hours or a few hours to an entire night, but it's definitely done in one month, and kind of approach a lot of my mural painting that way. I don't like to work on murals that take weeks to complete. I like to complete it, at the longest, in a few days. Um, and if I'm working with kids, students, it might be longer than that. But to get back to how it felt to paint trains, there's no other feeling that you can compare it to um, at all. You paint something and you complete it, you feel like you've accomplished something, and then it takes a life of its own and it's out in the world. And when you see it, and you never know when you're going to see a piece running, you would never know when you're going to see a piece running on the trains. It could happen at any time. But when you see it, a week later or a couple of days later, even a month later, it's so exhilarating. It would be so exciting that it becomes addictive. And that's really what drives people to kind of continue to do it over and over again.
You made the connection a moment ago to your process painting murals, which follows a similar time frame. Folks want to know if there's an evolution from graffiti to mural painting, and was mural painting an accepted form of graffiti?
I would say that it is more accepted because a lot of the murals that I do now are commissioned by people. Either they're paying for it or at the very least, they may just be giving permission. So it is the fact that people are paying for it does make it more acceptable. And I got into kind of making murals. It was almost like an experiment. I painted those gates with Crash and Freedom on Park Avenue in the Bronx. And we didn't get paid for that. People paid us in compliments, and it was great. But that was a really early part of our development that showed us kind of what it potentially could be.
Some folks are asking where they can see your work in public sight. And I know you covered this at different points in the session, but if you could speak to that in New York specifically, and then any other ones that you want to mention outside of New York.
Well, in New York City, the murals I did in Coney Island are still there. They're a part of the Coney Island uh, Art Walls project, which features some of the best street artists and artists from all over the world. And it was curated by Jeffrey Deitch and sponsored by Daze there. So it was really a great project to be a part of. So I have several murals there. I also have murals in Long Island City, Crash, and different parts. I don't know the exact streets, or I have murals there, but I also have murals in different parts of the world. I think I still have some in Brazil, for example, and France. Had some in Germany. Yeah, they're all over. I mean, you can, if you go to my website, dazeworld.com, you can definitely see examples of some of the murals that I've done around the world.
Wonderful. And a lot of folks are asking how they can become involved in the process. They recognize the illegality of graffiti, but what recommendations do you have for young people to do art?
I think that, everyone has to kind of find their own voice and their own thing about what they want to do. I mean, when I started painting trains, there really wasn't many options, that were available. There were none really, to paint murals, to do anything like that. I mean, even the High School of Art and Design had, its negative points as far as what they were offering as a school, and this was kind of in the 1970s, and now it may be different, but I would say that, through social media, this generation is very lucky to be able to access the information on the internet, through social media. So I would say kind of look into that first as a point and try to get a general knowledge of the history of what happened and what went on, even before you start doing things, because, the more knowledge that you have, the better it is for you. The better you will understand that, you're not just out there painting similar way. You're definitely part of a timeline.
And so we'll take a few more questions here, but some folks want to know, why do graffiti artists identify as writers? And also any upcoming shows that you have or places where they could see you paint live.
Well, unfortunately, because of the whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing, that's kind of put a damper on a lot of exhibitions now this year. So I don't really have any upcoming things this year. Next year, there should be quite a lot, but it's really put a damper on what's available. What was the other part of that question I wanted to answer?
Yeah, some folks are noticing that we're using the term
Oh,
writing,
writers,
and they
yeah.
want to know why graffiti artists identify with that
Okay,
word.
we identify with the name writer to writing your name. And when you met someone back then, even now, you ask somebody, "Oh, what do you write? What do you write?" The word graffiti is really kind of a term that really doesn't describe it all. It's a broad term. So there's tons of things, negative and positive, that fall under the umbrella, and people really didn't use it, so much. It was more like, yeah, we refer to each other as writers. We're writers, in the real pure essence of the definition.
And folks are asking what you think about the current scene of public art, especially, as we experience COVID-19, what you're noticing around the city, something that people should pay attention to.
I think that the walls, really, people should pay attention to the messages that are on the walls. They are subliminal, but they're there. And I think that, it's great that, it's really great that there are so many legal outlets for people to paint murals. But I think, that you should not forget that it really just depends on you. And I come from a more do-it-yourself mentality. So you if you can't get your message out there one way, you've got to get it out there another way, however it is that's possible. But I like the whole idea of do it yourself and not waiting for people to grant you money or whatever it is that you're looking for. You know, you've got to put in the hours and you got to put in the years of really hard and dedicated work.
And one last question here. Some folks were very intrigued by your murals and wanted to know how they can get involved in mural painting, if there are organizations. How can young people kind of participate?
Well, I think that one of the organizations that I mentioned was called Thrive, and I'm sorry I don't have the complete. It's like thrivearts.org, and you could look into what they are doing because I think they're doing some amazing work. But there are programs that are out there. There's another program that I'm a part of called Leap Arts, which is also in schools citywide, and I've worked with them quite a lot. I mean, the mural programs are out there, but you know, you just have to look for it. But those are already two that you could look into.
Great. And we can post some of this on our website as well when we repost the video. And Daze, you mentioned kind of the do-it-yourself mentality. And that's something I really hope people take away from the session is that Daze has outlined the tools so that you can participate and, you know, be part of this legacy of writing. And so we encourage you to draft and to keep sketching what you started in today's session. If you want to share your work, Daze mentioned, you know, the what's wonderful about social media for seeing a lot of other people's work. So you're welcome to use the museum's hashtag #MCNYKids, as long as you work with a grown-up to do so. The museum is also doing something really lovely where we're asking if anyone would like to show their work. You can send in your submissions by visiting this website on our page, mcny.org/mcnykidscreate. There's very brief instructions there if you would like to submit work to be considered to be showcased on the museum's website in response to the wonderful session that Daze laid out today. And Daze also mentioned continuing to look at art. And so we encourage you to look at Daze's work in our collection at collections.mcny.org, but also go to Daze's website, dazeworld.com, to see the many facets of art that he's been involved in, from paintings to murals to graffiti, sculpture, photography. And I just want to thank everyone for joining today. It was such a beautiful session, and it was so nice to hear student voices in the questions. And Daze, thank you so much for such an inspiring session.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
All right, well, we hope to hear from you. Again, please go to our website and show your work. We would love to see what you took away from the session.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Daze.